if there was something if there was an opportunity in the office investment in Ho Chi Minh, that would be the number one pick, purely because there's lack of supply at the moment. Demand is increasing, and there's very little development on the horizon for the next 2 years. So we see rents picking up over the next couple of years, and some quite good growth opportunities in that sector.
Yep.
The easiest way to get an entry into Vietnam is through residential. Right. So for smaller ticket size, residential is the easiest access.
Yep, absolutely. And I was looking at your research, and I saw that, the occupancy rates are pretty high across the board, right, from grade A on down, around 90% average. And that's, so the supply is very tight. You see the demand on the rise. Where's that coming from?
I think really on the back of increased, the business activity, sentiment's good, confidence is up. So general business activity in country is good. So most of the requirements now on the office size are looking at upsizing. Still fairly few new entrants coming into the market, but we expect that to change as well, with a number of free trade agreements being signed off recently. So we are starting to see a steady increase of new companies coming to Vietnam as well. So overall, office market, Ho Chi Minh is pretty positive.
Yeah. Right on. Okay. So, look, I think in the interest of time, we're just going to go ahead and dive right into this, since we've got a fairly broad topic and only 30 minutes to cover. And we've got, looks like 10 people, along with dial-ins, are on the call right now. We're expecting 30. So what we'll do is we're just going to record this call. And for those who are coming in late or who couldn't join, we're just going to put this out to our members and give them the option to listen in after the fact. So with that, I'll just dive right in and just give the floor to you in a second, Stephen. But just for the benefit of those joining, this is the Frontera webinar series focused on Vietnam property. We have the pleasure of welcoming Stephen-Wyatt from Jones Lang LaSalle. He's the country head of JLL's Vietnam office. You're in Ho Chi Minh City, correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And Stephen's been in Vietnam for 5 years. We just caught up a little before this call. And prior to that, he was working in the firm's Botswana office, has been in London before that. And he's got very good access into both, understanding both the macro trends and just very granular trends within the two major metropolitan areas in Vietnam, as well as some just more general views on other topics of interest for our investors, such as a lot of these off-plan residential developments now springing up along, particularly in the coastal communities, given the changes that have taken place with regard to the housing law in Vietnam, which was amended earlier this year. So I could talk more at length about what we've written about in Vietnam, particularly with the property market, but I think it's probably best just to turn the floor over to Stephen. Welcome to the webinar, and if you wouldn't mind, just why don't we take 10 minutes or so, and you could just give us a view, top down, of what's happening in Vietnam right now. It's been in the news a lot, with the passage of the TPP. The economy is obviously humming right along. We've had this amendment to the housing law. Just give us the unvarnished, objective viewpoint here, not just the sales pitch, if you don't mind. But tell us what are some of the minefields and the considerations that people need to keep in mind when they're considering whether or not to get involved in this market.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for the introduction, and welcome to everyone. As Kevin mentioned, I'm Stephen Wyatt. I'm country head of JLL Vietnam. Been here for 5 years. I would say 4 of those years have been pretty tough and very soft market conditions. We have seen a real increase in activity over the last 12 to 18 months on the real estate sector, and that's really been driven by an economy that has come off some pretty harsh conditions. I mean, if we look back 5 years ago, we had inflation tracking at 22%. We had interest rates that went to 18%, and a number of other sort of key factors in the market that really brought the real estate market in particular to a bit of a standstill. What the government has done over the last 2 to 3 years really changed things around. It should be sort of, I suppose, noted that it's still effectively a one-party rule state. It's a socialist government, so they have the ability to change things quite dramatically without too much sort of consent from the public, and they've actually done a very good job. So we're now in a position where we have the economy growing at 6.5% this year. Q3 was actually showed at 6.8%. Interest rates have come off from that high and are now tracking at between 8 and 9%. Inflation has come down to between 2.5 and 3% this year, and overall, all the economic indicators are looking much more positive and much more stable. So this is what's really sort of generating a lot of renewed confidence and a lot of renewed sort of increased sort of market sentiment in the real estate sector. So we started to see 12 to 18 months ago the domestic market really coming back, and a number of the larger domestic developers really increasing development activity, certainly in the residential sector, and that continues today in some force. So, I mean, the good news is, development activity has picked up quite dramatically, but also sales rates have also are keeping up at this moment in time. So, sales volumes have increased in a fairly big number compared to previous years, but then we're coming off quite a low base. So, overall, a much positive, a positive picture about Vietnam. I think there's a number of key things that I think that Kevin touched on that are also happening, which is having a positive effect. Manufacturing is becoming a big sector in Vietnam. You would have probably read about Samsung. Samsung are one of the largest investors in Vietnam, and now they're just under construction on their third major manufacturing plant in Vietnam. They are projected, I think they already are producing 40% of all hand phones in Vietnam. That's set to go to 70% within the next couple of years. There's a number of very successful sort of good case studies to refer to on the manufacturing side that will continue, generally on the back of fairly low labor costs is one of the main contributors to that. So what we're seeing is a number of the large-scale manufacturers now looking to relocate from China, relocate and not necessarily wholesale relocate out of China, but I think they're no longer looking at taking more space in China. They're looking at alternative markets such as Vietnam and possibly in Indonesia and Philippines. So very good news on the manufacturing side, and that will only continue with the number of free trade agreements that have been signed up recently. So the Korean free trade agreement, the EU agreement, The TPP is under, as I'm sure you're aware, is under negotiation, has preliminary sign-off. I think that's going to take a little bit longer to be pushed through, but all of these trade agreements are great news for Vietnam, and the press has been very positive, because I think Vietnam is probably going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of these trade agreements out of all the countries. So with the increase in manufacturing, that will obviously bring more stability, more work. The knock-on effects for the real estate market are huge, and so we whilst we see a big momentum at the moment, we do see it a medium to sort of long-term future growth for the country, which I think is is a positive sign for the country, because I think one of the key things for investors is that we are talking about it's a very much a frontier market. Vietnam is fairly early days from a property market point of view. The size of the market here is still fairly limited. So we do tend to see cycles much quicker than a more mature market. So I think that really needs to be taken on board if you're looking at investing in Vietnam. Having said that, we are seeing a huge amount of interest from foreign investors at the moment, which is good. I think the government is open to foreign investment. They have openly announced that they really want to open the doors and increase foreign investment in Vietnam, and would appear to be very welcoming for foreign investment, both from a residential individual unit point of view, and also from much larger mixed-use developments, office investments, and obviously the manufacturing side. So I think it's a very interesting time for Vietnam, and at the same time there are pitfalls, there are intricacies in the market that need to be taken into consideration. So we always recommend any investor looking at Vietnam to obviously undertake as much market research as possible. The market is fairly untransparent. It's a little bit difficult to you get good data on the market and good intelligence. So we would certainly recommend trying to get as much market research on the country as possible. There are intricacies certainly on the legal aspect as well. As Kevin mentioned, that there has been change of legislation for foreign ownership as of the 1st of July of this year. Again, what we tend to see is the legislation comes in and there's lots of positive news and lots of great press, but unfortunately there needs to be still further clarification on that foreign ownership, because what we are finding that there still needs to be some further change in the legislation to assist foreigners to actually buy property in Vietnam. As an example, you need very, very difficult to actually get the mortgage. So it tends to be a cash only purchases that can buy, because it's very difficult to get a mortgage in Vietnam, because you can only get a mortgage for the length of the visa that you have to stay in the country, which can be anything from 3 to 2 years, which obviously makes life a little bit difficult when you need to prepay your mortgage in a couple of years, unless you have obviously the cash to do it. So there are still some issues with the legislation, and we can sort of talk through that in a bit more detail. But overall, as we sit here today, we are very positive about the market. It's for us as a business in Vietnam, we're very much in a growth mode. and we see Vietnam as a big opportunity as not just as a business but also as a real estate market. So I hope that gives a brief overview of Vietnam.
Yeah, thanks very
Any
much.
questions?
Yeah, no, it's very useful. Thank you for that update, Stephen. So I was just thinking about what the interest rate on a 3-month mortgage would be. I suspect it would be on the low side. So hopefully that will be sorted out in the coming months and years. I know it's early days, but this new housing law. I'll just dive right into a question we got from Jing, who's joining us from Hong Kong. She asks, after Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, which cities have residential opportunities worth taking a close look at in terms of price, liquidity, and quality? If you look out, beyond the 2 major metropolitan areas, for somebody who's thinking about taking a punt on a residential property in the wake of this new housing law, where would you recommend they take a close look?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think one of the things to bear in mind about Vietnam is that you have a population of circa 90 million. You have the 2 major cities in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, which combined are maybe 15 to 20 million, depending on how you analyze the numbers, which leaves a large chunk of the population in the countryside. So I think any investor that I would speak to, I really would play on that, because every investor that I speak to say, well, it's 90 million population, the opportunities must be huge. That is correct, but there's still a huge part of the population that are in the countryside in the agricultural sector. So to answer the question, I think there's opportunities in the coastal areas like Da Nang and Nha Trang to a certain extent. So Da Nang, you could look at opportunities. As an example, there's a number of branded hotels that are now selling out villas as part of so you could the Hyatt as an example, you could buy a branded residence from the Hyatt, which is also in their rental pool. So I think Da Nang, again, it's seen a little bit of a soft market conditions over the last 3 or 4 years, but it's very much back on the radar. They've opened, there's now direct flights, I think, with Hong Kong. So they've really opened up. There's a number of international flights from, I think, from China now, from Hong Kong, from Korea. A number of golf resorts or golf courses in Da Nang, international sort of standard, like Montgomery Links golf course. Banyan Tree are also looking at selling a number of villas as well. So that seems to be a bit of a theme in the coastal areas now, certainly in Da Nang. So you get a branded resort that also, that they're now selling out villas as well. So, and some fairly good opportunities under $500,000.
Right. One of our call-ins, Tim from the U.S., is asking about actionable opportunities in the office markets in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh. Tim asks, at the moment, there seems to be a fair amount of private equity opportunities, but not much in terms of REITs or any sort of liquid investment. For a relatively small investor who wants to get involved in this market, what are the yields that could be expected, and where would you recommend they try to get involved? Yeah,
I mean, what we're seeing at the moment in the two major cities in Hanoi and in Ho Chi Minh. So two very different markets at this moment in time. Ho Chi Minh, very much the commercial center, is ahead of the curve from a property market cycle point of view. Lack of supply in the market, and we do see rents starting to increase as of sort of Q1 of 2016. Hanoi, on the other hand, oversupply, and we expect that's going to take another 18 to 24 months sorry, there's a bit of feedback there. 18 to 24 months to take up that supply. In terms of yields, I would suggest yields in both cities ranging from 9 to 11%.
Okay. That's a gross yield or net?
That would be a net yield.
Okay. Very interesting. Another question for the field. Given that the segment of Vietnam's market that caters to foreigners is still relatively new compared to other countries in ASEAN like Thailand, and Vietnam's GDP per capita is much lower, is it safe to say that property prices in Vietnam are still relatively high? And what is the reason for that?
Yeah, I think that's again a fair comment. I think what we're seeing is, I think as I mentioned, we're still very early days in the property market in Vietnam, so still very much a sort of a we classify as a frontier market. Hasn't sort of reached emerging market stage at this stage. So for an average apartment in Ho Chi Minh, 10 minutes outside CBD, you're looking at a sales rate of between $1,800 to $2,000 per square meter.
Right.
So for a 70 square meter, 2-bedroom apartment, 10 minutes outside of CBD, you're looking at, say, 140,000, 150,000 US.
And you could expect that 9 to 11% yield on an investment like that in the current market.
No, on residential, yields are between 5.5% to 7%.
Let's see. Another question coming in from the U.S. Understand that the new residential housing law says that buyers can't exceed 30% ownership of an apartment building or 250 houses in one district. Is there a limit on the number of units a foreign fund or investor could buy?
Yes, the same would apply.
Okay. Right.
So it's 30% of any any condo building. So total number of units cannot exceed 30%.
Right. Okay. And another question coming in also from the U.S. I was researching opportunities in Ho Chi Minh City, and I saw a lot of projects launching this year. Are there any high-quality projects that you would recommend people take a close look at right now?
My personal opinion, and I think from a business point of view, I mean, we would always recommend going with developers with strong track record that have shown that they can develop not just in the region, but I think developing quality products in Vietnam. So some of the some of the latest launches that are coming to the market. So I would suggest City Garden, which is a new development. Actually, yes, it's phase 2 of a new development in Ho Chi Minh.
Okay.
Very, very good development. It's actually by a local. It's a sort of a joint venture between a local group and a group from Australia. Phase 1, very, 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 very successful, sold out very well, and they're now launching phase 2. It's 10 minutes from CBD, and quoting price is a 2,000, low 2,000 square meter, and great potential for sort of some capital growth on that project. Other projects, we would tend to recommend, like I say, the more, so the Singaporean developers like Capital Land and Keppel Land. So both are launching new projects at the moment. Keppel Land have a phase 2 of the Estella, which is in District 2 of Ho Chi Minh. Again, 10 to 15 minutes into the CBD. Selling prices there, again, around $2,000 a square meter. Good quality product. And in terms of leasing, these units are fairly easy to lease to the expat market.
Right.
So I think one of the key things to remember if you're looking at it from an investment point of view, the leasing market here, it is unusual for Vietnamese to lease property. They like to own their property. So the leasing market tends to be dominated by the expat community. So if you're looking at a residential property in either city, you need to be looking at areas that will be suitable for the expat.
Right. Okay. Good. Very good insight. Jing has another question. Is the government considering granting residency visas for foreign property investors or owners?
Sorry, can you repeat that one?
Yeah, sorry. The question is, does the Vietnamese government have plans to grant long-term residency visas for foreign investors or property owners who take title to a property in Vietnam?
I'm not aware of anything at the moment. I think this issue has been brought up purely because at the moment, so the requirements are for anyone to own a property in Vietnam, they need a valid visa. So you need to, what we're finding is for foreign groups, or if you're looking to buy an individual unit, you actually need to come to Vietnam.
Right.
Now that can be a little bit limiting if you're, if in the US and you want to just buy a single unit, and you have to come and fly here and get a valid visa to be able to come and buy the property. So again, there's certain issues with the current legislation that is going to be restrictive for a number of people.
Right.
So we expect there's a working group that is working with the government at the moment to try and iron out some of these issues, because they're not really, they need to be addressed. So we expect some announcements to come, I would think, in the next 3 to 6 months on that.
Okay. Cor is calling in from the Netherlands and asks, who are the type of investors that you see investing now in the property market in the 2 major metropolitan areas, more specifically in the CBD or prime shopping mall locations, grade A office? Who are just in broad terms, the foreign investors coming in?
Okay. At the moment, it really is a real mixture. I mean, and it's Vietnam is attracting investors from a global basis. So from the US, we have some of the well-known private equity groups such as Warburg Pincus, TPG. We have some of the big pension funds from the US as well that have been in the market for some time, but they're now looking to increase their exposure. So Warburg Pincus, as an example, put $300 million into one of the big conglomerates, into a group called Ving Group in Vietnam, in their retail platform, and are looking to really get exposure into the retail market in Vietnam. Coming back, we are seeing more European investors now. I was with a fund from Finland last week. We're seeing more groups from pretty much from all over Europe. We're seeing some of the sovereign wealth funds from the UAE, and they're fairly active in the market at the moment. The groups that have always topped investment in Vietnam, the traditional groups or the traditional countries, are the likes of Japan, Korea, Singapore to a certain extent, Hong Kong, and they're still very active in the market. So it's a real mixture from all over the globe that is now sort of looking at Vietnam.
Okay, and Sujit has a question about the types of projects that are cropping up in Vietnam right now. Are there certain developers from abroad or within Vietnam that have a stronger track record than others? And are there any that you would recommend taking a closer look at?
I think the Singaporean groups have always been fairly strong in Vietnam. So the Capital Land and Keppel Land are so Keppel Land have about 20 projects in Vietnam. Capital Land have just announced their 9th project. So they are fairly strong, have good track record in the market. There's a very strong relationship on a G2G level between Singapore and Vietnam. So we expect that to continue. We are seeing a lot of Japanese developers in the market as well. So there will be a number of some fairly high-profile Japanese residential developments happening over the next 2 or 3 years. Hong Kong Land, as an example, have just started construction on one of their new residential developments, and that's going to be very high profile, very high-end luxury residential development. So probably worth having a look at them, because they're very well known for developing high quality residential developments. But it really is quite a broad mixture of countries and developers that are in the market at the moment. It really just needs a little bit of time to understand the market, and like I say, I think looking at their track record and seeing what they've developed previously.
Right. Okay. Another question from Hong Kong: for properties that come with a rental program, I've seen returns based on revenue and profit. For example, Banyan Tree offers 40% of the rental revenue pool to owners, but another program offers 80% after costs factored in. Which of those strategies is more standard and or less risky for the owners, in your opinion?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of these rental programs at the moment, and to be honest, some of the returns that are being offered look unrealistic. So I would really be a little bit careful with some of these rental programs. I think Banyan Tree, some of the well-known groups, I would be more comfortable with that are offering the fairly attractive rental. I know Banyan Tree are very aggressive at the moment. They do need to sell. They're under a bit of pressure on that particular development this is the Lang Co development in Da Nang. So they are offering some very, very attractive rates. It's a fantastic development. I was there about 2 months ago. They have spent a huge amount of money on this 200 hectare development in a gorgeous bay in Vietnam, and the properties are very, very attractive. So opportunities like that, I would be considering. There's a lot of other rental pool programs that are being offered at the moment that I'm not quite sure how they're managing to offer such high rates, to be brutally honest. So I think, again, just try and if there's any specific opportunities that you're looking at, we're more than happy to sort of give some further advice outside this course.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, everybody obviously needs to do their due diligence, and it's great if a firm like yours is able to assist with that. I have 2 questions, and my first is, we've written about Vietnam in the past here at Frontera, and I've noticed that whenever we try to discuss the property market, we see a lot of quantitative data from different sources that conflicts with each other. In your opinion, where should somebody like us or anybody who wants to do their due diligence, what are the sources of information that they should be looking at? I mean, obviously JLL is the top of the list, but in terms of publicly available information, where should we go to get the objective, unbiased view on what's happening?
I think there's a number of sources. I mean, there are a number of international property consultancies like JLL. So we would generally try and cross-reference with our other counterparts in the industry to give a bit of a joint view. I mean, our numbers are always going to sort of vary slightly, but overall, looking at Savills and CBRE and some of the other groups, we're generally in line with each other in terms of the numbers that we publish. In terms of official data from the Ministry of Construction, they do publish numbers in terms of new launches to a certain extent. It's not that easy, and trying to rely on some of this data can be a bit of a minefield, to be brutally honest. In terms of our market research and other groups that we know, I mean, we basically have a dedicated market research team that is going out and talking to developers on a weekly basis to get an update in terms of what is actually happening on the ground in the market. Otherwise, there's no system. There's no land registry system in Vietnam at the moment. I think it will happen, and we're very much trying to push it. I also sit on the sort of the RICS advisory side, and we're certainly trying to push a more transparent land registry system, so all the transactions are obviously open and readily available. But we're still quite some way away from getting to that stage at this moment in time.
Okay. Yeah, that's very useful to know. So no active land registry. What are the safeguards in place for a foreign investor to ensure that they have clear title when they when they decide to become involved?
I think that's one of the key things that we find from a foreign investor point of view. From a residential point of view, you're fairly, if you stick with the well-known developers, you're fairly safe that you will get official title, and you will get your pink book or red book and your necessary legal documents. From a investor point of view, if you're looking at doing a JV or looking at doing a large mixed-use development as an example, then obviously lawyers are involved at a fairly early stage, no different to sort of any other market. But the main issues and the main drawbacks of most deals from a foreign investor point of view is the ownership issue. Ensuring that obviously it's clean and clear, ensuring that if it's a development site that the land is compensated, so there's no issues with outstanding compensation, making sure that you have the necessary planning consents in place, and the land use rights certificate, because all property for foreigners is for 50 years. So you can only buy a 50-year. The maximum you can buy is a 50-year lease. So
is that lease renewable, or is there has that been written in as an option?
In theory, it's renewable, but it is a negotiation.
Right. Okay. And my second question. Oh, sorry. We've got one. Hey, Gavin, I see you waving your hand. Can you just type it into the chat? And I'll,
sure.
Thanks. While Gavin's typing that in. So we've had a good response to our advertising of this webinar today. I think there is a significant amount of interest in the Vietnamese property market amongst our client base or our membership, and that ranges from people like one of the people on this call who is interested in potentially buying property somewhere in Vietnam for themselves personally, up to another gentleman who's the managing director of a $10 billion family office in New York. So with that being in mind, that's the range of people that are going to listen in on this call, either live or on a recording. We just talk to what are some of the services that you can offer for those people who want to start the due diligence process, potentially get involved in the market.
So from our point of view, from a JLL point of view, we've been in the market for 10 years. We have, just to give you an overview of the business, we have close to about 200 people in the business in Vietnam. We have a strong capital markets team, so we've carried out a large number of capital markets investment transactions in the last sort of 12 to 18 months. So we do that due diligence process on either on a smaller scale or on a much larger scale. So this year, I think we will have transacted close to 300 million US, which is small from a regional point of view, but fairly big for Vietnam. But I think the key things, depending on what the investment is, if it's a residential unit in a development, we can give very straightforward, honest advice in terms of track record of the developer, who they are, what they've done. Give you some comparables in the market. Make sure that the price that you're looking at is in line with market conditions and the payment terms, etc. We can recommend some local lawyers. So I think it's really just having a local office with a pretty large footprint in Vietnam that can give you some fairly comprehensive and professional advice in terms of what we're seeing in a day-to-day basis in Vietnam. On the larger investment stuff, we are marketing, a number of opportunities now, whether it's an office investment or service departments or hotels or pretty much in all sectors. We have live mandates, and we are actively marketing a number of investment opportunities. So either contact me or get in contact through the website, and we'll be able to provide further information.
Right on. Thank you very much. And I think for the last question here, I'm actually going to defer to our managing editor, Gavin, who, just by the way, for your information, Stephen, you wrote last year where one of the chapters was focused on Vietnam as in the context of material investing. But Gavin, why don't you just go ahead and ask the question directly, since you're already on the call. This is one of those questions probably is better for you.
Yeah, sure. So I was just typing in the idea here. When I visited Vietnam, I had the pleasure of going to a friend's house. He had a beautiful house right by the river, but it had this huge steel wall. So he couldn't actually see the river because he'd been burgled, several times, and he had to take those precautions. I'm just wondering how concerning the security situation is for property owners, and what the costs, what's involved in kind of protecting your property. Thanks.
I think there is security issues. I think it's not malicious. It's fairly low key, but it does happen. We are in a major city. It's there's 8 million plus people in Ho Chi Minh, and I think that that it is certainly there. What we are seeing more of is gated communities. I think that will come into play more and more. There's a very high-end development happening at the moment by one of the local developers, which is sort of 30 very high-end exclusive villas, and it's purely gated. I think security needs to go a long way in Vietnam. We're still fairly behind in terms of security. I think it rely on actual the security man rather than any systems necessarily in place. So I think that will come into play as well. But yes, I mean it is an issue, and I've certainly had a number of friends that have had break-in, but it's fairly petty. I mean, it's quick in and out and just take the TV and sort of run. I know it's not nice, but it's not touch wood. It's certainly not violent or sort of anything malicious.
Fair enough. Okay, I know we've run a bit over our stated time here, Stephen. So I think we've covered most of the questions that have been dropped here in the chat. I'll give you the last word. Is there anything else you'd like to add for benefit of our listeners? Hello? Can you hear me? I think we may have lost our audio.
Hello?
Yeah.
Sorry,
I lost you for a second. I'm not sure what happened. IT issues. No, I was just saying, I think we've come to the end of our time here, and I just wanted to ask if you had any final words of wisdom or any points you'd like to make for benefit of our listeners.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to have a chat today. I think there are lots of opportunities in Vietnam. I mean, and it pretty much in all sectors. I think Vietnam has a big growth story, and there is huge potential for the country. At the same time, it is an emerging market. There are some pitfalls, and I would suggest that any investor looking at Vietnam just to really undertake that sort of initial market research, do your due diligence, and stick with well-known, trusted developers when you're looking to invest.
Excellent. And we have your contact details here, and we'll make those available to the members of the Frontera Investor Group, or FIG, which is our premium membership-based community that we host. And anybody who's listening into this recording should feel more than welcome to contact us if they would like to learn more about FIG. Be put in touch with Stephen at Jones Lang LaSalle, or anything else related to Vietnam in general. So with that, Stephen, thanks very much for taking the time today. We'll publish this to our site within the next few days, and we'll be sure to send an advance copy to you. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right. And thanks everybody else for joining. Have a good day.